This is the make or break issue.
This conversation is going to be only as fruitful, as safe as your small groups are.
Unless we fight as hard as we can to make that happen, it doesn't matter how great our curriculum is.
You know better than anyone else that culture is changing.
Youth ministry is complicated.
And doing it by yourself is really challenging. So
let's rethink it together. Sound like a game day.
Welcome to the Rethinking Youth Ministry Podcast.
That was exactly like I imagined. Welcome back to the Rethinking Youth Ministry Podcast. I am so excited today to talk with my friends about what we're rethinking when it comes to family, comparison, the Bible, and community. I'm Ashley.
I'm Shane.
I'm Leslie.
Stuart.
Jeremy.
We're excited to be here with you. For months, we've been having conversations about family and comparison and the Bible and community, and we're excited for you to pull up a chair. We just released our fall season of middle school and high school XP3 curriculum, where we release series on these topics. But regardless if you use the curriculum or not, we think this is going to be helpful because we know you probably talk about these topics with your students. So we wanted to kind of pull the curtain back and invite you into some of the conversations we've been having, things we've been wrestling with. So I'm just going to throw a topic on the table and open the floor.
Great.
This could get dangerous.
Let's do it.
Let's go.
All right, let's start off with comparison.
Ooh, comparison. Well, we got to partner with someone for our curriculum part, which was Tony J. Collier on Instagram. So fun. But the cool thing about having her come and have conversations with us is that she's in ministry in a different capacity. And so the topic of comparison just had, I don't know, there's so many more things to talk about, which I thought was fun.
Yeah. Part of the conversations that came up with Tony is that this is not specific to just a gender. This is specific to everyone. Like
or a generation.
I was going to say, I thought that's what you were going to say, age group.
Well, yeah, it's definitely specific to a generation, but I just think about like the traditional frame of mind for who a teenage guy is, and we haven't always talked about comparison, but I'm like, it's a thing.
Yeah.
And it's been a thing. Like it was a thing for me. I'm sure it was a thing for Stuart and Jeremy. Like it is just a thing. It's a human thing. So I think the way we talk about it in light of that will open some really good conversations for every student.
How do you think like middle and high school, let's specifically talk about boys, experience comparison? Like what does that actually look like with this generation?
So many things.
I can't imagine. I mean, I know we talk about this a lot, but I can't imagine having had social media in the way that they do. I mean, from watching images of success to specific, fitness body types to all these differing opinions on who you should be as a middle school guy or high school guy. But not only that, like as a man, I just can't imagine. I mean, it was enough having specific opinions in my life, but now you have access to, it feels like an unlimited amount of opinions, and trying to manage that and figure out who to be would be so difficult.
I think just as with females, there's been this stereotype of what the perfect woman is supposed to look like. There has been the same stereotype with guys.
Yeah.
And a trip to the beach with your teenagers is a perfect microcosm of that tension of comparison. Because you can tell the young men who do not feel comfortable with the way that they look based on how they go to the beach. You can also tell the guys who feel like they're meeting the standard. So there's an old adage that comparison is the thief of joy. And that's just the physical comparison, not talking about the emotional comparison, because a young man who's sensitive, a young man who has feelings, a young man who's creative doesn't feel the ability to express that more times than not because of the stereotypes.
Would you say too, I want to ask the ladies that are sitting here, would you say that I'm correct in thinking that maybe traditionally or stereotypically within the church, this conversation is targeted towards females more than males? Like I've seen that. It feels like when girls had girls' nights, it was like, what's the topic? It's comparison. But they're not bringing that up, at guys' nights. I don't know. What's your experience with the topic?
And were you uncomfortable with something that I was saying?
No, I was going to say something.
Okay.
I was going to say something about your title.
Oh,
I was going to bring it back for.
Oh, you could.
You mentioned Stuart. You mentioned the Thief of Joy. That's why I'm obsessed with the high school title for this series, which is the Thief of Everything. Which how good of a title is that?
I mean, we're being a little dramatic.
Pretty obsessed with it, and the art is.
I see your joy, and I
raise you,
and everything.
Okay, sorry. What did you ask me?
Well, I was just asking, like, from your all's perspective, I feel like the stereotype in the church is when there's a girls' night, what's the topic? It's like comparison or something like that, but it's not often the one that's brought up in guys' ministry.
I'm so glad you asked that because that was a conversation we had even when we were filming teaching videos or like who's going to give these talks, and we're like, let's make sure it's not just females giving this talk. Like, let's make sure we have some guys giving this talk because you're right, it is an even playing field. And I also want to say something that I feel like we as youth leaders, parents, small group leaders often think is we only compare ourselves to someone of the same gender. And that's not true. Because I would say that there's a lot of comparison, not just between a girl and a girl, but between a girl and a guy or whatever that looks like.
Yeah.
I think that there are a lot of times where life perspective looks different for different genders. And I just feel like that's a conversation. I know that the conversations happen in their groups or in their community, a lot of times amongst the same gender. But man, I feel like that's something we haven't tapped into fully.
Yeah. Shane, to your question, I'm thinking about even the phrase like thief of joy feels like joy is a thing we tell women they need to be and have, but I can't really picture a room of guys being like, okay, let's talk about joy with the guys. And, so I think there's that layer. Right. So I think part of us even changing it from thief of joy to expand it to thief of everything, just to point out, because we wanted to be able to say comparison doesn't just steal your joy, it also steals your ability to focus. It steals, like so many other things that are happening in your life. So I wonder, do guys talk about joy, like needing to be joyful? Have you ever been in a room like that?
I don't know.
Teenage guys,
We should though. I mean, it's the fruit of the spirit.
Yeah.
That's
you need
for
more.
all people.
You need more joy in your life.
I'm incredibly joyful.
Happiness depends on what happens, Shane.
Oh gosh.
What? Why are you coming at me? Joyful person.
You sound joyful right now.
Oh my gosh. Okay, I'm going to throw a new topic on the
I
table.
want to say one thing on
Sorry,
comparison and
question,
guys. I think one more thing is that guys have a different pressure now because it seems like, without naming any names, it seems like there are a lot of experts under the guise of actual toxic masculinity saying, here's how you become a man, right? And so I think that generation has a lot more people who are experts at your manhood telling you these different things you need to hit and become.
Say more about that.
Oh no, what?
From the perspective of a female,
oh man,
I think it's important for us to hear why you call toxic masculinity.
I think a lot of times, or at least some of the videos I've seen in the past, the things that this expert, quote unquote, was saying to young men who are eating it up and paying money in the live to get more attention on their, like these young men are like hungry, right? They want to know how to be a man. And the things that the quote unquote expert is saying are so damaging to the humanity of all people. And I think that's the part that it just hurts to see, like, not only are they taking away the dignity and the image of God from women, they're taking the dignity and image of God from that young man who's like, I just want to be, they hold this man as an expert, and their own dignity of saying, like, here's how you have to be, here's how you have to play the game, here's who you have to hurt, here's what you have to be angry about, like all these things. I'm like, man, this is a lot. It's a lot.
Wow.
The insanity of that to me, and I love what we're doing, is that it actually contradicts the person of Jesus. Because they will champion in their mind, the masculinity of Jesus and diminish his empathy, diminish his capacity to love and have compassion. To them, that's not masculine.
Right.
So they almost half Jesus, and you get a version of him that isn't complete. So what we're doing, I think it screams even more why it's important.
I think we also talked a lot about, as we're having the conversation about comparison, like this conversation is going to be only as fruitful as safe as your small groups are. Like it has to happen in the context of a safe place. If people are actually going to be authentically vulnerable about what they struggle with when it comes to this. In fact, that's one of the things we also talked about is just what does real community look like in middle and high school?
I feel like the thing that speaks to the whole topic of comparison is that it is a core identity issue. Like, we're talking about it in terms of how it shows up differently in different people, different gender, all of that. But it's at the heart of a person. I mean, to compare yourself to another human being means that you're probably wrestling with a level of insecurity or something within your own personal identity, like how you see yourself or how you think God sees you. And I feel like that's the direction we really went with the series of going, God sees you as made in God's image, as valuable. And if we can get to that place in our core identity, this issue of comparison shores up regardless of who you are.
That's so good.
Yeah. I think the heart of the matter here is that when we help students understand that they get to see more of Jesus in themselves when they stop comparing themselves to others. And they really get to understand what it means to be a follower of Christ, to be made in the image of God, and to live out this idea of an everyday faith.
That's great.
That's real.
Is it, pardon the pun, but is it safe to say that this is the make or break issue? Creating such a safe place for teenagers to be vulnerable, to be real, to share their insecurities. Unless we fight as hard as we can to make that happen, it doesn't matter how great our curriculum is, because they sit scared to death to be honest. Am I on the right track there, Leslie?
I would yes and that.
Okay.
I think we have a part to play in creating and modeling safe space and life together and being in community the way it looked when Jesus was walking the earth. And we have the opportunity to help a generation understand the role they play in building community with their friends too. Like we can create safe spaces, but if they never see their responsibility and their chance to be like, oh, I have to show up authentically with a group of people and do life together with them outside of the building, like go to their games, have meals together, do the things that Jesus was doing with people, then they never learn to create community for themselves. So
that's so good. I'm going to yes and that as well.
Let's keep going.
I feel like
we're just stacking hands is all we're doing.
Right. One of the things that we talked about a lot when we were tackling this topic of small groups in middle school is any middle school small group really a safe place? Like we might say it is, but is it? I hate saying it out loud. Like
I think there can be.
I think I agree. I think there can be, but like, are we being honest asking ourselves that question, or do we just say it because we're supposed to say that because we want them to believe it?
To some degree, developmentally, it can only be as safe as it can be.
Right.
Is that what you're implying?
That's exactly what I'm saying. Is like,
that makes sense.
It's almost like you and middle schoolers aren't always aware of what they're sharing. So you know what I'm saying? Like,
for sure,
they're saying what happened, but they haven't connected what that means in their life. You know what I mean? And so I feel like I just felt the weight of, man, are we telling our middle school students about the potential of a group where we haven't actually positioned our groups to be that?
That's good. All I can think about when you said that at first was a middle school guys group that I led back in the day, and I thought, no, I didn't feel safe every week as the leader. On my physical safety.
From the leader's position.
I was like, no, there were weeks I went home and told my wife, like, I'm shocked I survived.
You were leading the boys from Sandlot.
Like there were moments where I don't know where they all were, and I was like, this whole church campus could be in jeopardy. But in all seriousness, to what you're saying, Ash, I think that goes back to a principle that we really focus on in the high school version of the series, which is authenticity. And there needs to be an authentic version for middle school, an authentic version for high school, depending on where they are in their personal development, their cognitive development, in their relational, interpersonal development. I think that really matters. That matters for all generations, but when it comes to Gen Z and Gen Alpha, it is a non-negotiable. And the thing is, when it comes to maybe some of the traditional ways of doing small groups that have been really effective, like I want to acknowledge that. I think 4 generations and maybe, a couple of decades ago when they really emerged, it's what people at that time needed. But now there's a different level and a different perspective on what true authenticity is. So I can't remember, I've shared this before, but I can't remember if this is a quote I heard or if I said it. So I'm just I'm gonna attribute it to Stuart Hall. But this is what comes to mind when I think about this, that forced community is not community, it's compliance. Yeah. And I think often what we offer is like this forced version of community that if they show up, if they sit in a circle, if they answer these questions, but what if that's really compliance and that's not the authentic community they're looking for?
Yeah. I love that.
Go ahead, Jeremy.
I was going to say and not just to continually point back to the pandemic, but one of the things that I loved as a youth pastor was the fact that once we were able to come back in person with our students, that was what they yearned for the most, not the games, not the all the extravagant things that we did, but they wanted to just be together. And it gave an opportunity for me as the leader to really begin to cast a new vision for what community is and why they desired it so much, and to bring some authenticity to it. And so I love that we're talking about this because I think it's still relevant and still needed.
I love that you said that, because I feel like one thing that I hear, and it ties back to what you said too, Leslie, but one thing that I hear so much when it comes to middle school small groups or middle school community from parents and leaders is like, my kid just doesn't connect, or my kid doesn't want to come to church because they don't feel like they really belong anywhere, which I understand. Like, middle schoolers just feel that way in general. Like, they're going through a lot of change. But I think that's what we focused on so much in middle school was like, you're going to get out of this group experience what you put into it. Like, there is a responsibility that you have to build that community. So we can say that to a middle schooler, but if we don't teach them the skills of how to do that, they're going to miss it. And they're never going to feel connected to that community.
Can I, if I could, I'd love to speak to the other side of that.
You may.
Please.
And the other side of that, as a parent and as a youth leader, I agree with you, Shane. There is no such thing as forced intimacy. That's like saying diet gravy. It doesn't exist. So maybe what we should consider as we are considering community, especially for older high school students, the place where high school students are treated the less like adults more times than not is a faith community. Because we decide who they're going to sit with, and we demand, we want you to be vulnerable, authentic, and intimate with these people. These are the same teenagers, by the way, that drive to school every day, when they turn 18 can vote, go on mission trips and fly, internationally and nationally without their parents, but then come to church and adults say, this is who you're going to meet with, who you're supposed to be vulnerable with. And then you add social media on top of it. They share the wrong thing with the wrong people. It gets blasted all over the internet. Maybe we should start considering giving older high school students, especially, the ability to choose their own rabbi.
I love that, but I would argue that's also true in middle school, because up until puberty, really, middle school, access to a phone, social media, friendship is mostly based on proximity. It's who are my parents friends with, who's on my team, who's in my class, who's on my bus, who's at my lunch period. Like, it's about proximity, who's around me. But as soon as they have access to social media, or, they have more autonomy in life and they start having a bigger social life, their friendships become more about who they want to be friends with. And so I would say, I would argue that maybe we need to consider like affinity groups in middle school, although their affinities change. Maybe that's okay. Maybe they need to try out a few groups, and maybe it's really more about the leader they connect with than the group anyways. So,
Shane, don't you think we make some of those decisions though, just because systematically it makes it less messy? But relationships are messy.
Absolutely. No, I think you're totally right. Like, it's less messy, but it's also, I mean, we've gotten really good at structure. We've gotten really good at measuring specific things, so they fall within the paradigm that we're currently playing with and within, which is why I wanted to ask just the group as a whole, like, let's talk about what are some alternatives. I feel like we go there a little bit in the high school series. I don't know that I can speak to the middle school series, but like, I think you just mentioned affinity groups being one of those, but what are some of these alternatives that experiment with.
I'll speak on the high school side real quick. We wanted to model what it means to do life together and let small group be a slice of that pie, but to think of where other areas in your life you can meet with a small group of people that you can do life with. Mm-hmm. And so like we made like a list of 25 different things we want to challenge you to do over the next 2 to 3 months.
Great. That's
and
so
it's
cool.
like, have a meal together, take out your calendars and plan your next hangout, bake something together. It's like a list of all kinds of things. And it's that idea that if you age out of student ministry, you should still have the skills to practice what it means to keep gathering.
Yeah.
Like you need the skill to keep doing it. It is so hard to do even as adults, right? Mm-hmm. And so I just want to make sure we're setting them up on the inside to not have to deconstruct this idea of small groups. If they can say, a small group applies outside of this building and doing life together through my hardest times and my best times still works. Like,
I love that. Yeah. And like one of the reasons we have small groups or we have, intentional life in community or forced fellowship, I like to say, it is to talk and work out our faith. Yes. It's talk about and work out our faith.
Yes.
It's to navigate the Bible together, to navigate our faith, to ask questions, to share opinions and stories and hard things and prayers and all of the things. But one of the things we also talked about in this season was the Bible. Yeah. And I know we have all had so many conversations about things we're learning and things we're listening to and areas we feel challenged by when it comes to talking about the Bible, specifically with middle schoolers and with high schoolers, which we have caught ourselves so many times like, okay, well, maybe this is a conversation that adults might have, but first, this is the foundation for middle school and high school. And as that transition, so what does that look like?
I want to preface, this topic and go, we're not all going to agree. Yep. Even sitting right here and having this conversation, we're all going to have different perspectives on this. And I think it's really obvious within the church at large right now that there are a multitude of opinions about how to engage the Bible. But we kept that in mind as we crafted the content for this series. So, I hope we talk about that a little bit.
Yep.
It is interesting that we have a difficult time deciding who Jesus was and is, and what following him actually means. Mm-hmm. It's difficult for us to get on the same page about that, which may be a part of the beauty of this mosaic we call his body, but it also could be part of the tension of why it's so difficult to help the next generation take this library of books, poems, narratives so seriously.
Yeah. I think one of the stats that I feel like a lot of people throw around and are alarmed by, understandably, is the number of teenagers who have never read the Bible or who don't value the Bible or are Bible illiterate. And although those statistics can be alarming, one of the things we talked about was our goal as youth leaders and parents of middle and high schoolers is not just to get them to read the Bible.
Yeah.
It's to fall in love with a God who's crazy about them. Like if we don't have them interact with the Bible, then there's a chance they might miss Jesus.
Yeah. Right.
And who Jesus was, because God knows we don't all demonstrate it all the time that great. And so like that was
you're pretty
Jeremy
close.
does. Oh, yeah.
Jeremy does.
Jeremy
for
Leslie.
Sure.
No, just
So everybody
Jeremy.
but us.
Yeah, everybody but us, Shane. Sorry.
Speak for yourself.
It's the trucker hat.
Speak for yourself. No, you're right.
And so although it's true, like we don't all agree on everything, I think the truth of the matter is we're in this because we want students to know Jesus and fall in love with the Jesus on the pages and the way that Jesus treated people, like the way that we help middle and high schoolers understand how the Bible applies to their life should change the way they love themselves, the way they love others, and the way they love God. Like that's our goal, right?
That's really good. I think that's why I appreciate something that some friends over at the Barna Group say. They don't focus on biblical literacy. They talk about biblical engagement. And I love that distinction because I really feel like biblical engagement is what we were aiming for in these series that we created. We're not talking about just knowing and being able to recite and have understanding of specific scriptures. We're talking about engaging this collection of books and writings and historical documents and poems and prophecy and everything else, and being able to go, okay, how does this wisdom apply to life in my modern time? But in addition to that, present it in a way where we're not telling students what to think about the Bible. We're hopefully helping them discover how to think about the Bible as a whole, so they can dive into it themselves and do their own critical thinking, so that it lasts beyond their time in our ministries.
Yes.
I could not applaud that more and some. I sent this to our team yesterday, and I do think it's true. And part of what we have to help the next generation consider is, how do you critically think about an ancient library book of poems, narratives?
Yeah.
And I'm not meaning to be iconoclastic, but I do think there is some rich, deep, life-altering principles in this idea that technically everything in the Bible is biblical, but not everything that is biblical is Christian. And here's what I mean by that, because there are things that the Bible references that Jesus didn't necessarily champion. And the tension for all of us is, how do we help the next generation be able to not just think of it in this blanket statement, well, if it's in the Bible, it's biblical. Yes, technically it's biblical because it's in the Bible.
Yeah.
But does the person, life, example, and teachings of Jesus champion this idea? And what are those distinctions? Because to me, that's where it feels like we're getting in the weeds. We are wanting to produce champions of the scriptures, but we're not helping them learn how to be critical thinkers of the scripture. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying.
One of the things that I have appreciated the most from one of my former students was the fact that she said to me, as her youth pastor, I helped give her not only a safe space to ask questions and to think critically about the Bible, but just simply giving her someone to walk with her through it. And I think that's the heart of what we're trying to get at here, is that, one, students want to, I think students want to know more about the Bible, want to know more about Christ that's found in the Bible, but they don't want to do it alone, and neither do any of us. But they also need and desire a safe space to be human and to think differently, to pull and tug on some things and discover Christ on their own. And
so good, Jeremy.
Wow.
Yeah.
And I love so much that we have like a middle school version of a series on this and a high school version, because when you look at adolescent development research, we have something here called the Phase Project. If you've never checked it out, we'll drop it in the show notes. It's so helpful just to understand how the brain of a middle and high schooler work. Middle schoolers think more like engineers. So they're asking what and how. And high schoolers think more like philosophers, where they're asking the why. And that should be reflected in the way we're talking about the Bible. Like the way we're helping a middle schooler understand the what and the how to navigate. And then high school understanding, why does this even matter? Really falls in line with what's happening developmentally in their brains. And we cannot miss that. Like it's easy for us to think about talking about sex with middle and high schoolers is different. We're like, duh, like that's a no brainer. And that's usually when we hear from people and they're like, hey, we really want different series. But I'm like, y'all, we can't afford for our middle and high schoolers to miss what they need in this phase when it comes to understanding how to critically think about something that we value so much.
And as our resident artist, that feels.
Hey! I'm just kidding.
I apologize for the offense that I just made.
Yes, you're welcome.
Talk a little bit, Leslie, about how difficult it is to teach appreciation of art to an engineer student. Because that in some regard is the tension. We're trying to get a generation or a phase of engineers to appreciate art, and the scriptures in many ways is a beautiful mosaic, but we treat it as if it's this systematic thing, and there are parts of it that has systems in it, but it's more art than it is science.
That's it. Yeah, I don't really know what to say directly back to that, but I'm with you. Well, I do have this one thought that maybe relates. We, like Shane and I, and even we had phone calls with outside partners because we were just kind of trying to pick brains. What are the tensions that we feel when it comes to a generation and the Bible? And I think one of the really interesting things that came to surface is that we know that they're spiritual. They are into things like, sage and crystals and Ouija boards and tarot cards. And there's something about them being able to articulate the why behind what they hope those things are doing that we don't also equip them with when it comes to the Bible, if that makes sense. It's easier for them to say why they want sage to clear out, the
evil spirits.
Right, the evil spirits in their space, right? They're able to articulate that and it feels tangible. So it's like, the Bible can be this ancient tool. We don't have to overly make it we don't have to dumb it down or water it down. They can handle deeply spiritual things, right? If we help equip them, walk alongside them, help them have tangible, the why part of it, especially for high.
I think that there is a layer to this where if you as the leader haven't grappled with your own perspective on scripture, that's the best place to start. Because Leslie, you and I, we had plenty of conversation, philosophical conversation, debate.
It's a whole other podcast.
But that is...
Y'all hate each other now.
No, not at all.
Best.
No. It's amazing.
Best.
They're amazing conversations. But we had to come to it really open-handed and go, let's grapple with this. And I think that is a... What? What?
You almost said grapple. Sorry.
Or grapple. I think that is a really important place for us as leaders to start, is let's wrestle personally with our own perspective so that we can we're not going to have every answer, but so that we can dive into our own why before we try to pass one on to the next generation.
That's so good. And a shameless, selfless promotion. Ashley, you've written a book called titled Communicating to Middle School Students. You've written a book on how to see God. You've trumped us all. So you guys in some regard are the experts sitting in the circle. What would you say are the benefits of what you've written down that could help people maybe do this a little better?
That's a good question.
I think Leslie just said it. She said, teaching scripture isn't about dumbing it down or watering it down. It's about breaking it down. And the difference is dumbing it down lowers the level of difficulty. Watering it down makes it weaker or less effective. And breaking it down just breaks it into smaller pieces.
Ooh, so good.
Middle and high schoolers can digest huge concepts. They just learn differently. Their brains work differently. And we have to know that or they're going to miss it.
So good. Your book is so good. I'm serious. It's been so helpful for me personally. From the How to See God perspective, if they know all these scriptures and can quote, the Bible back to you back and forth, but they don't have the fruit of the Spirit, and that's not evident in their life, then they're missing something in their engagement with Scripture. Because I really think that's the point. The evidence we see of the work that God is doing in our world, in our lives, and other people are the fruits of the Spirit that Paul laid out. I really believe that. And so if we're aiming for transformation and we know that Scripture is a tool in that journey, then hopefully we wind up seeing more and more of the fruit of the Spirit.
I love that you said that, because I think something we hear a lot at Orange, and Jeremey, I know as an Orange specialist, you probably hear this on a daily basis, but people ask questions about our depth. And in a series on the Bible, I'm sure we're going to get questions about it.
Good.
And what I've come to understand is oftentimes the question comes from a place of there are different ways to measure depth.
Yeah.
It's about, some people measure it as amount of information. We could have written a series where we slap 100 Bible verses at middle and high schoolers.
Yeah.
But there's another way to measure it, and it's application of information.
Yes. Yep.
It's fruit of the Spirit. It's I can know all the Bible verses in the world. I could have all those tools in the world, but if I don't know how to use them, what good are they?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I think that is the heart behind our Bible series in middle and high school, and I'm really excited about it. I'm sure we could talk about this for
Can I make one more comment? The beautiful thing about Shane's emphasis on the fruit of the Spirit that I think we miss sometimes is that fruit has a root. It has a seed. It grows as a result of something. So what he's pushing at is, if there is not now obviously you're not talking about full blown blossom fruit immediately, but you are referring to the result of something that is in you.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah. And so if there isn't evidence of that, that creates a whole nother issue. But I think he's pointing to, that's how we should measure depth, in my opinion.
Yeah, that's good.
It's measured in love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, faithfulness, and self-control.
That's so good. Nice. I wish you would have said that before I wrote the book.
I love it.
I want to hear Jeremey really quickly just respond to what you said from an OS perspective.
Great.
I think it's important. Can you speak to that topic of depth and how you have those conversations with partners?
Yeah,
Obi-Wan.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing for all of us to remember is the fact that, one, we partner with, I don't know how many different denominations.
80 plus.
80 plus different denominations, and everybody's going to lean a different way. And so, but when it comes to depth, as we've already said, we don't want to water down the message. We want to be able to break it down for students. No one wants to sit there and get a fire hydrant full of just information because you can't take it in.
Yep.
And we have an opportunity to give smaller chunks to where students can actually hear what we're teaching and applying it and walking away with something that they can hold on to. So I think when it comes to the conversation of depth, we really have to change our minds in regards to what that looks like and what that means.
It's good.
So
I love that, Jeremey. Thank you so much. Your perspective is important. Thank you all so much. I feel like we could talk about this forever.
Oh, yeah.
Yep. But we've got one more thing to talk about
one more.
before we wrap this episode. And it's really, really important. And there were a lot of conversations behind the scenes. And it was talking to middle and high schoolers about family.
yeah.
I don't have friends. I got family.
But to piggyback on the Bible and moving us to the family, if the Genesis narrative is true, and we believe it to be correct, God instituted the family before he did the Bible, before he did the church. So we should take it seriously.
Yeah.
How do we do that? Talk amongst yourselves.
I think one thing that I'm really excited about in regards to rethinking this whole idea of family is how do we get middle schoolers, high schoolers, and their parents in the same room to have some important conversations about the Bible, about what they're experiencing together, what they're learning together, what they're hearing and seeing together. There's not a lot of youth ministries that are intentionally putting parents and students together. We have so many silo ministries. And so, opportunities to think through how do we get them in the same room?
That's good.
That's a brilliant and creative way. People should do that in this series. Like they should do that. That's such a great
Leslie, could
way
you
to
help us
contextualize
also,
it.
Like, we need to untraditionalize the idea of family.
Well, that's what I was going to say.
Yeah.
I think the easiest way, don't come for me. The easiest way to kind of flex that you have a very privileged lifestyle is to assume certain things about what families are. And it shows up in how you talk about family. And it's one of those ways that easily counts so many people out based on the language you use when you talk about both your parents. And it's like, okay, what does that mean? Or, like you assume certain things about their family, about their home structure. Those were like, even in our artwork, we were like, please don't draw a house when we talk about family. Draw an apartment building and there's someone there with, like a younger kid. And then maybe there's a family that also has like, it's the pets or maybe it's the shoes outside the door. Like how many ways can we represent the diversity of kinds of families so that all families are included?
Yeah.
I love that you talked about the artwork because we also had a conversation like that in middle school. And we're like, man, there are so many different kinds of family and how do we represent? So we went with the plant theme. We're like, this is going to be a plant family because we want to include everyone and show the diversity of that. And it was just a fun, creative way to talk about something where in the middle school phase specifically, like middle schoolers are trying to find more autonomy and pushing family away. And our role is to bring them back together in whatever way we can. So that was definitely a huge conversation. How do we visually show this?
I'm reminded of that. It seems like every time I get on a flight, there is an unaccompanied minor flying to see a parent somewhere else. And we have to change our perspective of how we define family.
I think at a really practical level, to the terms that we use from stage, from platform, whatever that looks like when we're referring to family are really important. So we should be saying step parent, foster parent, adoptive parent. It could be an older sibling who's raising a younger sibling, grandparents, auntie, uncle, like there are just so many different terms that we can use in that space. And I think as we communicate, it's important that we mix that up from time to time. So.
Yeah. And I know that came up a lot as we were dreaming of what this series could be. And I that's why I love where we landed in the series is the family you choose. So we talked about the family unit, but for some students, they want to choose a family to surround themselves with that, they align with, and I feel like, or feel supported by, and we wanted to acknowledge that. And I feel like, yes, like we're all blessed with a family when we enter earth, whether we have a relationship with them or not, but there's also a family we can choose to surround ourselves with in addition to, or whatever that looks like for a student.
That's what Vin Diesel did.
What do you guys think is the biggest tension for faith communities feeling more like family for teenagers? I feel like what is the biggest tension for faith communities creating a place where teenagers feel like their faith family is family?
I think there's a line. One tension would be balancing the line between cultish allegiance and actual authentic healthy family. It can easily be manipulated and abused if you're like, this is your family, or so I think there's just a line there. So that's one of the tensions. I'm sure there's hundreds of others, but that was the first one that came to mind for me.
That's one of the biggest tensions I feel around even just throwing the term family around in the church so loosely, is that if you're going to say your family, you have to stick with each other through thick and thin. Like the church should represent that. And that means that when somebody makes a decision you don't agree with, somebody goes down a path that you may think is not best, it is not we abandon them. It's we stick with them and we love them the way that Jesus should and would, not should, Jesus got it right, but the way that Jesus would love them, like that's what we should do. So that,
I think kind of to point back to what Shane was saying, like the words we use matter. One thing that we even in our curriculum as Orange have rethought since the last time we wrote a family series is the labels of a broken family or a dysfunctional family. We steered ourselves not away from ignoring those might be relevant labels to someone. We just decided we won't be the people to put those labels, right? So if a kid or a teenager wants to describe their family as broken or dysfunctional or whatever language, they can. We're not telling them, we're not invalidating them and be like, no, be more optimistic. But our stance and our language is we changed it to imperfect families because that's all of us, right? We changed it to families that have challenges. We just had more thoughtful language around whether or not we were going to use those phrases. We use it in a couple of places, but only in a list after we said imperfect, challenges,
I love that.
Changing, transit, all just whatever the words were, so.
And I would add to that, we also had a conversation similar to that in middle school. We also talked about a lot of times when we talk about family, we say things like if your family's fighting or arguing, that it's like not a good thing, but even healthy families fight and argue. So it's like we tried to reframe the way we're talking about it so that students understand like conflict doesn't always mean negative and doesn't mean unhealthy.
In my mind, the bottom line of how we talked about family is that it serves as the best place, regardless of what your family looks like. It serves as the best place for us to display the love of Jesus. Like if we start with those people within our inner circle, and we do, like you said, we kind of culminate the series in this idea of you needing friends and family. So they could be, those close friends that are like family. But that's really what sticks out to me through the journey we went on in developing this series is, those people, your inner circle, your family are the absolute best people to live out what it means to be a follower of Jesus and the way you love them, the way you care for them, the way you show up for them. And that is just really hopeful in and of itself.
That's so good. I would love for Jeremey to speak to this because your experience with family personally, I'm sure affects your professional perspective. I do want to say, as someone who both of my parents are no longer here, I think about how this trickles down to my work as a youth leader. Dr. Brene Brown talks about this idea that most people are doing the very best that they can do. And I have learned that the farther away I get from my parents being alive, realizing they were doing the very best that they can do. I think we as youth leaders also need to help our teenagers understand.
That's good.
And to start from that, like your parents are probably doing the very best that they know how to do.
Wow.
It would help us as ministry leaders, and it would also help teenagers do something that they expect from their parents.
Yeah.
Because they expect their parents to extend grace to them, but too often they don't extend it the other way.
That's really good.
I think that's an important thing. But please talk about how the idea of family for you personally transcends to your work professionally.
The biggest thing would be that I as a parent want to get it right with my kids. And I want to see them thrive as followers of Jesus. I want to model Jesus to them. And so I love the fact that what's unique about our curriculum and what we do is that we really challenge and encourage our partners, our churches, to partner with the parents. And that is so important because every day I have an opportunity to model Jesus and show where I mess up in following Jesus to my kids. But knowing that the church is there with me in partnering as a parent, I get excited about that because I need as much help as possible. And so professionally, it excites me that I get to help encourage leaders that, hey, we're with you in this to be able to help you not only be a better leader, but connect with those parents that may feel lonely or you may feel like you don't have the opportunity to connect with.
I love that.
That's great.
Both of what Stuart, you and Jeremey just said reminds me like a conversation that kept coming up and in all edit rounds and everything we created was, are we honoring the family unit? Because I'm going to get on a little soapbox for a minute. As one youth leader to others, we so often make parents or the family or the caregiver the butt of the joke. We say things.
The scapegoat.
Well, it's the cheapest, fastest way to build trust with a middle or high schooler. When you say, aren't parents the worst? Isn't it frustrating they won't let you stay out 1 hour longer? When we're telling a story or we're trying to show them we understand and relate to what you're walking through. But what that really does is it makes the parent or the caregiver the enemy.
It undermines them.
It undermines them. And we as youth leaders have got to rise above it. And it's easy because we're thinking we're trying to help this student. And so we want to build the trust. But one day we may not be in their life. And that caregiver or that grandparent or that auntie or uncle will be in their life. So what we do while we have them in our care and we're shepherding them matters. The way we talk about family matters. This was such a hard series to write, but man, does it matter.
Yeah,
for sure.
That's good. I have one thing that should be a soapbox, but I don't have enough words to make it a soapbox.
Okay.
But I'll just say it.
We'll help
Throw
you.
the soapbox right here.
Okay, here's the soapbox. If someone could speak to, and this isn't for what we're teaching about family. This is how you're caring for your volunteers, leaders, other people who are single during a series on family.
That's good.
There's just something there about, I think, about myself, like I'm a single person, but I have a family too, but I don't count because I don't have a husband and kids. I have a parent and siblings, So anyway, there's something there about not to turn the topic away, but you have to be mindful of how it's hitting the people who are serving the kids and teenagers too. Go for it.
My immediate reaction to that is I completely agree with what you're saying. And I don't think we help that demographic and psychographic understand enough how much of a bridge they are to whatever family structure they are serving as it relates to the teenagers they're walking in their life. Because a youth leader herself or himself cannot impact, as Jeremy's talking about, every single family. That small group leader can. And that small group leader is the direct line to every single family structure represented with the teenagers they're walking. So in some regard, they're 10 billion times more important than the person directing the deal. So helping them with whatever journey they're in as it relates to their personal life, but also helping them understand the magnitude of not just the responsibility, but the privilege they have to walk with a teenager and to be that connection to the faith community, to their home. I think it's huge.
I'm getting on the soapbox with you,
Yay.
Les. I'm on the soapbox. Okay, as we're talking about family, let's not assume every kid in our care wants one day.
Oh, whoops.
Yeah.
Talk about that.
Yeah.
Let's not assume that everybody wants to be married or wants children, because if we're looking at research, less and less people are getting married, less and less people are having kids, whether that's by choice or life circumstance. So I would say that. Second, I also agree with you, Les. I think, man, I there's multiple things I have to say about this. I'm like, don't go off.
Podcast. I know.
But I was going to say, a single person or a person who doesn't have children, I know that they still have a family and people say that. But when we as youth leaders say things like your family is your first priority, it doesn't mean the same thing for somebody who's single or doesn't have children. So I would love to challenge everybody with that kind of statement. I understand the sentiment, but maybe for you choosing to have kids and get married is what's most important for you. But what's equally important for someone who's not married and doesn't have kids is equal to that. So what is a better phrase to describe it? That would be something I'd add to the soapbox. Yeah. And then I would also say at the church in general, and I love family, I love kids, I love marriage, I love all of that, I'm for it. But the role of someone who doesn't have kids and doesn't have a family isn't just to help the families. That's what I would say. And church in general is built around the family. And so I think it's, whether they're your volunteers or your students who, wherever they fall on that, I feel like it's important to consider that perspective and how we talk about it and how we, lead our volunteers and families in those conversations.
Yeah. I want to say one hopeful thing. Just like you, I also love and adore families and kids, and clearly, right, we've given our lives to this. One thing that I found a lot of encouragement, and I'm not going to cry on this podcast.
You can.
Oh, no, I don't want to.
It's strength. It's strength. Let it go.
But the verse in Psalms that says, in Psalms, we talk about this.
In the Psalms.
In the Psalms.
The Psalm.
There we go. In the
I
Psalm.
like this.
It's in
the Psalm.
That's very poetic.
that are part of the Psalms.
The Psalms. Well, the verse that says he places the lonely in families. I think sometimes families even have an incredible opportunity to open their doors to the single or the whatever label you want to put on it, that volunteer or that leader who doesn't have family, that invites you into a different kind of relationship with what God is doing in their lives. So there were several times in maybe one of the most lonely seasons of my life where babysitting and getting to serve other families in that way was God's grace to me, right? And so there's layers, right? It's not saying like, it's definitely not being anti-family, but it is also allowing God to transform me, my own personal experience through how I serve and get to be a part of families. And so it's a gift for some families to be like, yes, I'd love if you come watch my kids for a date night and trust, that they trust me because now I get to play and have family in a way that's different than just showing up for only small group, right? It's like, no, I want to be in your home. I want to be with your people. I want to eat meals at your table because I don't have that in my own life. So
That's good.
Yeah, just putting that out there.
As you can tell, we have a lot to say about these topics, and I'm sure you do too. And we would love to hear how you're rethinking the Bible, comparison, family, and community. We'd love to engage in conversation, so reach out and DM us, and we'll talk to you soon.
Yeah.